Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue and Chasm Technology on Wikipedia and information warfare. Very sorry not to be joining you in the excellent Newspeak house, but I hope you've been having an excellent conference so far. And to say that although we can't, as the authors, be there to join you, we'd really like this to be the start of a discussion. So the questions and the ideas and the thoughts that you come up with after this video are things that we would really love to discuss with you at a later date. So my name is Oliver Marsh. I'm one of the authors, the many authors of this report, along with Carl Miller, who may be known to many of you at Newspeak House. And this work follows on from numerous other projects ISD and Chasm have worked on around information warfare, but specifically focused on Wikipedia. Our aim with this project was to consider likely threat vectors to Wikipedia from actors wishing to undermine its information integrity in coordinated ways. So to put it more simply, we were trying to work out areas where Wikipedia might be vulnerable to information warfare, a concept that I will bring up and discuss in more detail shortly. Our methods were desk research, some light touch interviews and discussions with editors and commentators on Wikipedia, though I'd hasten to add these were informal and we don't consider them representative of the whole Wikipedia community. So we're still very interested in hearing from more voices. And we also, and I've done a little teaser image to the side there, worked on some technological exploration of ways that we could discover threats, potential threats at scale. The caveats to this research is it is indicative and the interviews are not representative, as I said. We are just trying to think of ideas and possible ways that we could help defend Wikipedia, not considering the entire landscape of possible threats and possible views on these threats. And also, we as the authors are not members of the Wikipedia community. We consider ourselves outside observers and commentators. So again, there are likely areas that we as not kind of fully embedded members might have missed, and we would be very grateful to hear from you about that. So on with the project, and to begin by introducing this concept that Chasm and ISD have worked on extensively of information warfare. This goes beyond the kind of, as this excellent report from Demos puts it, the myopic focus on fake news, disinformation, misinformation. Information warfare is broader and more systematic. It's about the, as it says here, the selective amplification of reputable mainstream media stories to fit an agenda, or more broadly, just using information, bits of false information, bits of correct information to generally try and enact a sort of warfare style or conflict style outcome. The classic example being, as shown in the pictures to the right, a series of two protests in Texas, one very anti-Islam and one pro-Islam counter-protest, both of which had been organized on Facebook originally by the Internet Research Agency in Moscow. But the point of this case study is that this goes beyond falsity. This isn't just about someone lying and saying an event is happening. These events really happened, and they tapped into deeply concerning sentiment within the United States and made real events happen. Simply reducing the question to whether information is true or false does not capture what is actually going on in the full scope of information warfare. So obviously, as many of you will know, information warfare, disinformation and misinformation have been widely researched on social media. And there are a series of tactics that you see quite commonly. We won't go into all of these here, but we would be happy to provide more information on any of these. The crucial point is, again, these often border the line between legitimate research, legitimate democratic interests and expertise and ideologies, and into the more dubious, maybe false, but maybe slanted or kind of pointed uses of information to accomplish nefarious aims. So, for example, there are numerous Western voices who might align themselves with state-aligned actors in the Kremlin or the Chinese Communist Party. This is not to say that they are just spreading disinformation or their voices are false, but their voices can be amplified by state apparatus to make them sound or seem more influential than they actually are, just as an example. So we want to apply this kind of framework to Wikipedia. Now, The threats to Wikipedia, we think, can fall into two main buckets. The first is undermining the integrity of Wikipedia on Wikipedia's own terms. So we like this phrase that people on Wikipedia should be here to build an encyclopedia, and that disruptive behavior is people who are not here to build an encyclopedia. And on the page about being here to build an encyclopedia, there are numerous examples of disruption, but some of the ones that we were most interested in are people who show a general pattern of disruptive behavior, or use, for instance, what are called sock puppets, as many of you will know, fake accounts, so one person controlling numerous accounts to game the system, and also using a long-term agenda to put across a particularly slanted point of view across multiple articles on a similar subject. We were also concerned with threats beyond Wikipedia. For instance, the use of Wikipedia to legitimize certain points of view on social media. So dubious or nefarious uses of information on social media backed up by articles on Wikipedia that maybe also align with this nefarious use of information. And also, as Wikipedia is used to try and automate many fact-checking devices and programs, there are questions that if Wikipedia was somehow undermined or nefarious information warfare was systematically present, even in a low-level way across Wikipedia, what impact could that have on fact-checking more broadly? Now, as many of you will know, there is a very strong defense mechanism on Wikipedia, which is based in the community. Volunteer editors, mostly hundreds of thousands, arguably even millions of them, all the way to a much smaller number, so in the tens of users who have special privileges. For instance, the check user tool, which can be used to establish if users are making sock puppets or creating multiple accounts and controlling them from a single point, even if they've been blocked. So the line of defense of Wikipedia, we think, really is its community and this network backed up by some technological automation, but largely relies on really good work from mostly volunteers. So one particular sort of threat to Wikipedia is at the content level. So adversarial editing. So this graph that we've put here shows the volume of edits on the Tiananmen Square page on Wikipedia, and you can see a huge number of edits appear on 2009, which is one of the anniversaries of the massacre. Now, obviously, these edits may be prompted by people having a genuine higher level of interest. It may be prompted by people with a genuine ideological view on the subject, though, as Wikipedia would say, there are issues when people come to edit a page with a particular ideological view. But there are also concerns that this is coordinated and trying to overwhelm Wikipedia's defenses with the sheer volume of edits, and the volunteers simply can't undo at speed. So as we've noticed, adversarial editing can be supported by various things. One of them is just determined individuals who, again, may genuinely hold a certain point of view. Coordinated editing, so multiple accounts, but also use of dubious source material. And as many of you will know, Wikipedia does disallow certain source material, certain domains, certain outlets, but also what we might say generally acceptable sources of information do sometimes publish articles that take a counter mainstream view on certain topics, and these can be seized upon and can be quite hard to ban outright, because they may come from papers such as the New York Times, for instance, as one of our interviewees raised. But these articles do take a counter mainstream view that maybe doesn't stand up to closer scrutiny. So one would hope that closer scrutiny happens on Wikipedia, but it's not as easy to just ban that source outright. We were also looking at what we might call systematic threats, so going beyond individual editors trying to coordinate and edit particular text. For instance, editing on non-English Wikipedias, which maybe don't have as many volunteer editors to protect against nefarious edits. So a good example of that was Croatia. And for more information on this case, you can see the Croatian Wikipedia disinformation assessment of 2021, where a certain group basically managed to temporarily sort of capture Croatian Wikipedia for a certain ideological point of view. There is also the concern that some of these administrative positions that act as the last line, or at least further back lines of defense against dubious editing, so the ones that can make difficult decisions or ban users or limit users' access, if they could be infiltrated through gaming of elections or particular nefarious candidates. And there was a case study here of the Wikimedians of mainland China, where some Wikipedia users were downgraded or outright banned for their sort of pro-Chinese Communist Party activities. And one could argue this is a good example in that these individuals were caught and stopped from gaming elections. The question is, could that happen again more successfully? And then also finally, this question of, even without systematically gaming systems, relying on volunteer editors does mean that they are subject to things like abuse, doxing, publication of personal information, threats, and also just exhaustion if you are having to constantly deal with bad faith editing. And many of the people we spoke to brought this up, but also there is this article that I have put in the slide. We've explored various ways that Wikipedia can use its human infrastructure, the editors and the admins and check users and such like, to protect against threats. We in Chasm also wanted to do what is our bread and butter, which is technological advances or technological tools which might help people do that kind of counter-information warfare work. So we wanted to explore ways in which technology could be used to act as a first warning or a first source of detection of potentially nefarious activity on Wikipedia. So we wanted to establish a series of seeds which could be used as very likely dubious activity from which we could discover and identify other dubious activity. So we use the Russo-Ukrainian war page as a case study. This is the page for the war that's been ongoing since 2014, not just the most recent invasion, which means there is quite a long spread of material that we could use. So of the edits on this page, 86 were made by editors that had subsequently been blocked for various reasons by Wikipedia. The editors themselves that had been blocked were only responsible for a relatively small proportion of the edits on this page, but they had also made a lot of revisions across multiple other pages. So we considered them good seeds to establish and find other dubious activity. So the first thing we did was create an editor page network. So the large nodes, the circles here, are each of these blocked editors. The smaller nodes that kind of fade into a bit of a fog in this picture are pages that they have edited. We've only included pages that were edited by at least 2 of them, and the colors are automatically assigned rather than us manually selecting and defining communities. What we established was that, as you might expect from manual inspection of Wikipedia edits, that people have thematic interests, and these dubious editors definitely did have quite recognizable thematic interests. So editing clusters of pages on Judaism and Poland, or clusters of pages on Iraq, Libya and ISIS, or more potentially surprisingly around airports and commercial aviation. Now, this was aligned with previous research done by Wikipedia to establish that dubious editing often can be perhaps ideologically driven, so people have thematic interests, but also some dubious editing takes the form of multiple accounts all trying to edit similar pages and make similar edits on similar pages. So even if a dubious edit is revised once and perhaps the user is blocked, another user comes in later and makes a very similar edit. So here we're seeing this in visual form. Another seed that we could establish to kind of find, visualize and spot dubious activity is dubious domains, so state affiliated domains. So we looked through all the domains used by the blocked editors as source material when they were making edits, and we manually appraised that 37 of these domains were state sponsored or state affiliated by the Kremlin. We looked at the edits that had been that had used these domains, and for those of us familiar with Kremlin disinformation, information warfare, the themes in these edits were extremely familiar, which suggested we were onto something with trying to establish pretty likely dubious activity. So one example is casting doubt on objectivity. So for instance, saying that Western commentators had identified gunmen and changing it to Ukraine Western commentators had branded gunmen. For those who don't know, the left side here in yellow is the original article, and then the blue is the added material. You also see historical narratives that are familiar in the war against Ukraine, so casting doubt on the legitimacy of the current government using historical narratives. We see alternative reportage, so where some papers and media sources are saying about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there are other sources added. So here, Sputnik News, to kind of say, actually, there's other things happening as well from the kind of pro-Kremlin point of view. And also, as a kind of elaboration on this, adding at length Kremlin quotations and press releases without a countervailing point of view. So here's a couple of very long quotes criticizing the US by the Russian Foreign Ministry, added without any kind of contextualization really, or countervailing view, and at some length. So using what we were pretty confident were state affiliated and suspicious domains, we could then identify new editors that hadn't been blocked at the time of writing. So we did this by creating another network. This used data from the only from the Russo-Ukrainian war page, so not pages beyond that. Here, the yellow nodes are URLs from state-sponsored or state-affiliated domains. The green nodes are these editors that we've already identified as suspicious. They were the ones that have been blocked. But the red nodes were editors that were also using these domains on the Russo-Ukrainian war page, but had not at the time been blocked. So discovery of new potentially suspicious editors. And in line with the first example that we discussed, we saw that they were effectively being used sometimes to add material that blocked editors had tried to add and had been removed. So we think this IP address in red here is another example of an account that perhaps should be blocked. And we would hope that if this were possible at speed and scale, that other new accounts could be found relatively quickly at on potentially dubious pages, but also combined with the discovery of pages that are being edited from our first seed, we might be able to discover new pages that are under threat and the actors that are causing those threats. But these are our preliminary thoughts, and for now, concluding thoughts. As I say, we want to make sure that we discuss this further with you, and we would love to have an extra session with you where we can actually interactively communicate with you. But just to leave some concluding thoughts now, we're keen to move from what we've done here, which is description of material that has happened in the past, to detecting material that is potentially going to be a threat now or in the future. So for instance, on the right here, we found some pages that we think are being heavily edited using potential domains, threat domains, and threat by threat actors. Some of them are perhaps unsurprising, but some of them, for instance, list of traffic collisions, perhaps might bear further investigation. Systematic comparisons between blocked and unblocked behaviors. We want to see if there's this kind of baseline of activity that kind of characterizes systematically dubious users, which is distinguishable from normal editing activity on Wikipedia and can be used as a form of flag. And also, and this is where Chasm really does do a lot of work, is text level analysis of linguistic content using natural language processing to establish themes, sort of linguistic tics and behaviors, which might distinguish dubious editing, perhaps within a certain thematic domain. So for instance, recognizing themes within edits on pages about Taiwan or about Ukraine, for example. And we hope that takes the material we've done here, which is a retrospective look at a page that's been contentious for a long time, and allows this seed activity to take place much faster and identify threats that are happening right now in collaboration with the sophisticated human infrastructure that already exists on Wikipedia. So we'll leave it there. Thank you for your attention. As we say, we would love to hear more from you, and we put some contact details on the slide, and I'm sure you can ask for them separately as well. In the meantime, we hope that you have a really interesting discussion following this presentation and a really enjoyable rest of conference. Thank you.